other month for the chlorophyll and nutrients, but fecal is every single month. And the reason we do that is it's more cost effective. We have to pay Lake Watch to filter the samples or analyze the samples for us, and it's pretty costly. So that's why we do every other month. And the other things we collect are, what is this? So we collect wind. Show them how that works. You don't have to turn it on. You can pretend it's on. How do you do it?
You hold it up, and when the wind catches it, it spins. And then you take it down and look at this. It will have numbers on it, and it tells you how fast the wind is blowing.
Right. So we write down miles per hour, the wind speed. We stand up on the bow of the boat, make sure we're not under a bimini, like the wind speed. And this also collects the temperature in Celsius. Then we collect water clarity with the Secchi disc. So do you remember how the Secchi works? We drop it over the shadiest side of the boat. There are two different colors for Secchi disc. One is clear, one is black and white. And that provides contrast whether in fresh water or salt water. The fresh water is black and white, salt water is clear. But if you use the black and white one all the time, it's just, we haven't noticed a difference. But some people want to know why there's a difference in them, and that's what it is. So you lower it over your shadiest side. If you have polarized glasses on, that's the best. Lower it all the way down until it disappears. Then you bring it up slowly till you can see it again. And at that point, that's when you count these lines. These lines stand for 1 foot each. So if it was here, that'd be 1, 2 feet. So we would write down the Secchi disc was 2 feet in depth. And Secchi disc shows us the clarity of the water, and it's kind of the same as the turbidity that we monitor on these sondes over here. So we collect pH, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, temperature, salinity, and I think those are all.
Yeah, I think those are the main ones.
And all that is on that sonde right there.
Mm-hmm.
And we just take off this cap here at the bottom. This cap comes off. We lower it down over the side of the boat. We collect two different depths. If it's greater than 5 feet where we're sampling, we collect 1, and that's about 1.5 feet below the surface. If it's greater than 5 feet, we do 1.5 feet below the surface and then 1.5 feet above the bottom of the seafloor. Everything shows up right here on this handheld. You just hold down an on button, and all your primers will show up here. You give it a minute once you lower it, let everything stabilize, and then we record all that onto hard copy data sheets. And that is that.
Perfect.
So it's so easy, even a 6-year-old can do it. So if you're interested in volunteering, have some free time.
We have to learn all the leg movements.
Especially on the bow boat when it's waving. Yeah. Thank you, Freya.
Thank you. Right, so you guys already took care of this, so I'll just kind of keep going. For the water quality report cards, you have them in front of you if you were able to grab some. If not, there's some copies in the back. But we really are focusing on the nutrients, so talked a little bit about how that process is done, and we're really focusing on total nitrogen and total phosphorus. This is important. They're important for plant growth. When you have too much of them, you can have eutrophication, algal blooms, and things like this. This is actually an algal bloom on Deer Point Lake from the other day that they posted on the DEP algal dashboard. So something important to continue to monitor. The other thing we include on the report card is bacteria. We're really looking at this through the lens of impacts to recreational use of water, safety for swimming, things like that. It's typically measured as fecal coliform or enterococcus. If it's enterococcus, that is what the Florida Department of Healthy Beaches uses. So you may see some of the Healthy Beaches sites, and they should post when there's an advisory and it did not pass. And so there are a couple of those sites throughout Bay County and Gulf County. So Carl Gray is one, Beach Drive is one, and then of course the main swimming beaches out on the Gulf side. And so they monitor regularly for that during peak season. Yes.
Is it okay to ask questions?
Yeah.
What's the time frame between when the
The
sample's taken and
reporting.
when they find out the result?
So the
For-
fecal coliform.
yeah.
Just in general.
So our fecal coliform, we have a 6-hour holdover. That means once we collect the samples, they have to be to the lab before 6 hours is up. They put it in a water bath overnight and it has to sit there for 18 hours. And then they go in and we use most probable numbers. So that's basically where they count colonies. And they can give us the data. Typically they have it the next day, but they send it to us monthly in a spreadsheet.
The Healthy Beaches program is a much quicker turnaround. I think it's like 2 days post sampling. And then they generally resample if there is a pour. If it didn't meet the criteria, they will resample.
The reason we get ours monthly is because we have 70 stations spread out over the whole month. So instead of this getting one at a time, they send us the whole month bags at the same time.
Thank you.
And FDACS, or the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, also monitors fecal coliform using a slightly different method, and they monitor in the shellfish harvest areas, and they collect routinely as well, and they have a different process that they follow too.
I know, I'm stealing it, but one thing to think about, when you're looking at fecal coliform and things like that, we sample, the water's always moving. So we get a glimpse in time. So right now we might go out and sample, we get that data back and it says, oh, the fecal coliform is really high. So we go out next month and we sample the exact same spot and there's nothing. So it gives us a glimpse of what's happening at that very moment. So that helps us find trouble spots. So when we go back month after month and we're sampling the same location and we're still getting high, we know there's a problem. So if it's just that one shot, it could be migratory birds that are on the water. It could be a location near someone's yard and they have, we've had a lot of rain and everything's going into the watershed and they have dogs. So dog poop is something that people don't think about, but that is also a cause of pollution in the bay. So it could be a lot of different factors. So we look at it as a whole when we analyze our data. So we want to find the trouble spots and that's when we can do something different.
And we're hoping to do a microbial source tracking study to determine in those spots that continue to pop, what is the source? So you can kind of figure out, is it dog poop? Is it human? To better determine what management strategy we need to take to reduce those closures or just generally high values. The other thing we have, which we have already learned about, is water clarity. So turbidity and Secchi depth. They gave a wonderful example of how to use the Secchi. So that's one of the kind of parameters that we have. And then in St. Joe, they don't do Secchi depth. So they really just use turbidity. So that's a little bit of a difference between the report cards. And salinity, the amount of dissolved salt in the water. It's important for distinguishing between freshwater bodies, saltier water bodies, figuring out what's estuarine versus ocean, fresh, can help us look for trends of saltwater intrusion and something that's supposed to be fresh. And it's also really important for a lot of our species. For example, scallops and oysters tend to have kind of a sweet spot for the range of the salinities that they like and that they reproduce and grow the best in. And so monitoring the salinities can be really important for species like that to understand, oh, we're seeing a decline. Is it because of this thing? And so St. Andrew Baywatch was here giving us a demo. They are one of the people and groups that do monitor water quality, but there are a lot of others as well. And so there's Lake Powell Community Alliance, Lake Watch, who does some monitoring, not here. We really send samples and they do a lot of the post-processing. And then our state agencies also do water quality sampling, in addition to some of the cities, counties, and then federal agencies and any little research projects that pop up throughout. So there are a lot of people collecting water quality, and it kind of gets deposited in a variety of locations. So there is one sort of entry place for all the data called WIN that anyone can go look at and download reports if you wanted to see who else is collecting water quality around here. It is publicly accessible. You can create your own little reports. The problem is not everyone does submit their data there. So it is tricky, but thankfully Baywatch does. So when we pull for St. Andrew Bay, we can get all of Baywatch and all of DEP, for example. So just one of the complicating things when you get to the level of pooling together all the data, there's a lot of folks collecting it and it's not necessarily all in the same place. And so we, the estuary program, aren't the ones out collecting. We just get to have fun with the data after collection. And so it's without these partners that are going out to collect the data, we wouldn't be able to do what we did with making these report cards. So it's really important to support those organizations, help them continue to monitor so that we have these long-term data sets to assess kind of what our water quality is now and into the future. And it's really helpful and important to use for when we're looking at how effective a management or restoration event was. Water quality tends to be what a lot of the funders want to see a response in. All right, and we already got through this. So thank you for that rundown of how we monitor water quality. And now we'll kind of dive into the sample stations. So for the St. Andrew Bay report card, we really just wanted to highlight the great work that Baywatch does monitoring water quality for this bay. And the only stations that we include in the report card are their stations. And so there's no additional FDACs, there's no DEP stations in here as well. It's all St. Andrew Baywatch. And you can see they cover a lot of ground, right? And so we really just wanted to spend some time highlighting how wide and how spread out these sites are to really get excellent coverage across the bays. And Christina, I don't know if you'd like to talk about kind of the history of site selection or not.
Well, site selection has varied over the years, depending on what's been going on in the community and local government. When we started, we just had a handful of volunteers, and so we didn't have as many sites, of course. And over the years, we've adjusted depending on what's going on. Like the runoff into West Bay from what is now Conservation Park, our water quality data was used to start the whole conservation part to filter out runoff before it came into the bay. So over the years, we've changed our stations. We've added more. We've taken some out. For instance, there's one spot in Johnson Bayou. If you know anything about Johnson Bayou, it's a little tiny bayou just down from here off of Florida Avenue. It's a little bigger than this room, but we had 3 monitoring stations in there. So I'm not exactly sure why we had 3 in there when 1 in the middle would do. So we looked at this data a couple years ago, and our sites, my husband Mark and I sat down and looked at it and see what we can streamline, because when COVID hit, we lost a lot of our volunteers. A lot of our volunteers are older and retired, and COVID was tough. And so we had a lot of volunteers not come back. So then it made it a little more difficult to go and collect all those samples from 70 different stations every month. So we had to sit down and look at the data and look at our sample stations and say, why do we have 3 stations right here when 1 will do? So sometimes over time, we've had to make adjustments. Something might have been happening in this particular area years ago, runoff when they built the airport, things like that we don't have anymore. So we no longer need that water quality station in that point. So our stations are variable and fluid, and we can adjust them as needed. So we can always add more and then take away depending on funding and resources available, such as volunteers. So that's why we have 70 currently.
But that's been the standard though for how many years?
7 years.
7 years.
Yeah, for 7
Those
years.
70.
Minus 2 stations in Johnson Bayou. We've had these same for the past 7 years.
And many have been the same since they
Since 1989.
originally started, yeah. So we have really nice coverage just from Baywatch alone. And so it's a little different in St. Joe. One of the big differences is it's a smaller bay. It's not broken into different segments, so it's a little easier for one organization to kind of do it. And really the main collectors that we're using in the report card are the Central Panhandle Aquatic Preserves there with DEP, and then FDACS, the Shellfish Harvesting Area region. So this just kind of shows you the nutrient stations, which also include the water chemistry kind of parameters, and then the fecal stations that FDACS monitors. So pretty decent coverage with all of these stations. Okay, so I kind of just wanted to go step by step through the report card. If you have them in front of you, if you have one of each, you'll kind of see that St. Andrew Bay is set up a little different than the St. Joe Bay report card. If anyone needs a report card, if you just want to wave your hand, we have some folks in the back that can pass them out. And then how many people here are really here or are more interested in one bay or the other? Do we have an even amount? Okay. So this is the St. Andrew Bay report card. It's a little different than St. Joe. The St. Joe Bay report card, again, it's not broken into the different water bodies because it doesn't really have those natural breaks. And so kind of the first thing that I wanted to provide some background on is the numeric nutrient criteria. And these are really kind of the foundation of what we used to make that annual water quality score. We're really focusing on the nutrients, the bacteria, the water clarity and salinity, but that annual water quality score, that's really looking at the nutrients and fecal or the bacteria. And so this is just kind of showing you the map that you can access if you would like. It shows you where these regions are, where they have set criteria. And so it's probably hard to see on this screen, but you can see St. Joe is one same region, but then St. Andrew Bay is broken into separate regions. So the criteria for West Bay are going to be different than they are for East Bay. And so that is a little bit of a complicating thing when you start to break it down. And these are state developed and adopted criteria that are in the administrative code. And so please don't worry about this, but I just wanted to provide you what this is and where you can find it and the source of the criteria, which is for most of these from administrative code. Our dune lakes like Lake Powell, that's a little bit of a different beast because you can't really apply the estuary criteria to a dune lake, but you can't really apply the freshwater lake criteria to it either because they do open and interact with salt water at some times. So some researchers have developed similar numeric nutrient criteria for them. So it's not in the administrative code. But this is just a table showing you what those are. And so this really is the foundation for coming up with how we evaluated if the different sectors for St. Andrew Bay were doing well, if they were green, if they were yellow, if they were red. And so this kind of just steps you through our process to do that. First, we look at the stations, we identify what numeric nutrient criteria applies to each station and water body. So let's say you've got a point in West Bay, then that gets the West Bay numeric nutrient criteria. If you have a point that's in Betty Bayou, then that would apply the North Bay numeric nutrient criteria. So little bits of differences there that make it a little more complicated. Then we determined if the stations met their specific criteria each year using an annual geometric mean, which is the same kind of mean that the Florida Administrative Code requires to assess if things are meeting the criteria. And then we rolled it up to look at the percent of stations that were meeting that criteria overall. And that's what you see on that first page, that annual water quality score. So for the first column, you're looking at the percent of stations that met the criteria for the whole St. Andrew Bay, with noting that they have specific criteria. And then we put them into these categories. So if we had 80 to 100% of stations meeting their criteria, then we get a green. If we had 60 to 79.9 meeting criteria, then we get a yellow, and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit of the breakdown. And so this is what your annual water quality scores look like for each nitrogen, phosphorus, and chlorophyll, because we have unique criteria for each of those. And so you can see in 2023, overall, we're doing good in St. Andrew Bay. And there were some issues for other variables or in other years. So for phosphorus in 2021 and 2022, and nitrogen in 2021. Any questions here, Daryl?
Are you gonna look at rainfall data to check against the water quality? Because when it rains more, typically water quality goes down. Are you including that in this?
It's not in this report card, but it's something we can explore, yeah.
The only issue with that is, as Christina pointed out, they're taking a grab sample. So it's like 1 point. So really to do that the best way, you would have to go out when it's raining and then when it's not raining, which Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys sample regardless of the rain.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you record that and we could probably parse it out, but it's not, there could not be enough data there to support yes and no.
Yeah,
Because of the monthly
Right.
grab sample.
yeah, I was just thinking I mean, people say, wow, water quality's great, and they haven't rained for, come on.
Yeah,
And then next sample, you have.
It's not
rainfalls
good.
and people say, do we have a spill? Which may have, but it could also just be that you got that flush.
Mhm.
And we have rainfall data. I can put it into, I mean, it'll take me a little time, but we have it available.
Yeah, we can pull it down for,
And we have what rainfall stations to use based on where our water quality stations are.
Mhm. Yes.
Give us samples of what it takes to affect each one of those things. What causes it to go up and down?
That's a great question. So kind of on the bottom of your report card, it has a little info about potential sources that could cause this. So things like kind of what Daryl was saying, when we have a lot of rainfall, you're going to see increased runoff, which can be bringing your fertilizer that you put on your lawn into the bay. So maybe we're seeing elevated nutrient levels because of that. It could be failing septic systems that are kind of leaching. It could be wastewater spills because we've had excessive rain and a lift station fails, for example. There are a number of reasons that it could be, and we are hoping to get a nutrient source tracking study to pair with our microbial source tracking study to understand in these areas where we are seeing, a station that is continuously high for nitrogen, what could be that source? And you can do some different sampling methods and analyses to kind of figure out if it's more maybe fertilizer versus septic or wastewater sources. So that's kind of the next step you would have to take to pin it down a little further than just the general, this is likely what it is, but we don't have concrete evidence of it.
Thank
you. Any other questions?
This is an annual meeting. Can you say something about seasonality in some of these things, general?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is general seasonality when we think about rainfall and when we see more rainfall. We have looked at that just in the data, looking at means, not the geometric means. But I am sure there is a seasonal pattern. I have not looked recently to really say, yes, the winter is worse or summer is worse. But yes.
it'll depend on your parameter too.
Mhm. All right, so the other thing on your first page of the report card is fecal coliform. And so I didn't have that in that giant numeric nutrient criteria table because I figured it was too much already. But really for this fecal coliform column, we're looking at the percent of stations that were over 800 mean potable number, which is like an excessively high number. And in the class 2 kind of water quality standards, if you exceed that one day, like that's warning, like something bad has happened. So we just went with that number to keep it as simple as we could to apply across all of the stations. Especially because these are grab samples, it's hard to know if we caught it on a good day or a bad day.
So the criteria, when they do their monitoring and it's based, they do it a lot more frequent.
Mhm.
And it's based on 10% of their samples, but we only collect once a month. So that's why if we have one day more than 800 MPN, we red flag it. Because we're able to take that 10% from multiple collections because we just do it the once a month.
Mark?
Yeah, do these same numeric nutrient criteria, do they apply the same criteria for all water bodies? Like regardless of where you are in the bay or St. Andrew, St. Joe Bay, is it the same criteria or do they vary with water bodies?
They vary with water body to an extent. So, for example, they really just have, I'll go back.
So for fecal coliform.
Fecal coliform, it
800
doesn't. Yes, fecal coliform does not, but the numeric, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the chlorophyll does. And so this is just showing you like East Bay has its own, West Bay, North Bay, St. Andrew Bay, Deer Point has its own, Low Water, Lake Martin, and St. Joe all together has its own. So they kind of, it depends how the state views the water body
Based on, yeah, your use.
and your use.
So if it's, our potable water in Deer Point, we want to make sure it's the cleanest.
It has different
Yeah.
standards, yeah,
Shellfish area.
yeah.
Shellfish or fish.
So there are several layers to water quality standards. There's classes, and then there's the numeric nutrient regions that have been established too.
Is one of these outstanding Florida water, I think maybe.
Like
Lake
now.
Powell.
Lake Powell is,
And
yes.
so that would presumably meet the criteria.
Mhm.
Yes. I
Mhm.
do not any longer think that Lake Powell is an outstanding water body. And I did a presentation for Lake Powell 2 weeks ago, and I said, based on this criteria, so when they received that, that was a while back.
Yeah, it hasn't been
It's been a very
updated,
long time
yeah.
ago. And things have definitely gone down a lot since then, and there's a lot more development out there and a lot more on water usage and things like that.
Yeah. So for the fecal, the other thing we wanted to pair with the fecal are kind of the number of annual pollution notices. So this is similar to the number of sanitary sewer overflows, and you can get this data. It's also publicly accessible. You can sign up to receive email alerts, and unfortunately, I receive them more often than I would like to for our area. And so we're just showing here in this sanitary sewer overflow, the number of notices annually. So in 2023, there were 139 notices for Bay County, and that's at the county level. And I included whether it was cleaned up or not, because it's still a pit spill that impacted.
And did you include whether or not it impacted the water body or not?
No,
So
Yeah.
it's just the number.
it's just the number. Yep. The way, not to go into the weeds, but the way that spreadsheet is updated, some entities provide more information about the spill than others, so it's really hard to parse out exactly what happened.
Do they all report quantity or just?
They're supposed to, yes. And they often report the initial quantity, and I don't think go back and update it to the true quantity.
They can.
They can, but I don't know. I think they have to at the state watch office level, but maybe not for this pollution notice, because the pollution notice doesn't serve the It's not like a replacing the state watch notice that they have to do as well, which I think is a little more intensive. But I'm not an expert on that.
They watch data just to try to look at trends, like, or, because you may have 50 spills, but they're smaller. You know, or trying to get a handle on.
We could,
Scale.
yeah, we can,
Scale quantity
Mhm.
versus just the number.
we could.
I think in general, it's more interesting to look at the cause. So sometimes there's vandalism,
Right.
sometimes a generator didn't start.
Yeah.
Sometimes the pump was shut off, or sometimes it was I and it spilled because it was overwhelmed. So those are the ones that we would really be focused on as the estuary program, of being like, okay, you have a reduction in the spills from I, which is the rainwater infiltration. Then the system gets too overwhelmed and they spill, versus one side, someone went
It's
biased.
great,
Yeah,
Or somebody putting in a line actually drilled in.
yeah. And the commenting on if it was that, sometimes isn't the clearest or the best to be able to successfully parse it out. Yeah. But at least it's better than 2021.
Well, I guess that's where I was kind of going.
Yeah.
is Hopefully.
Hopefully, we'll see a trend. Mhm. Yeah. And the public notice only started in 2017. So further back information you'd have to pull from the State Watch Office. Okay, so that was all for St. Andrew. So for St. Joe, it is very similar, except we have one numeric nutrient set of criteria for the whole St. Joe Bay. It's not split. And so all of the stations were meeting those criteria, and it looks good. And same thing for the fecal coliform stations. Again, these are FDAC stations. They're not collected at the same location as the nutrient ones, so it makes it a little wonkier a little bit, and there are far less reported sanitary sewer overflow events there. Again, we don't know if that is capturing all of the events, but it's what we have readily access to. So this is kind of my favorite part, is being able to kind of dive into the individual trends. So if you flip to the second page for St. Andrew Bay, took the same premise of what we did for the annual water quality scores, but then we just looked at each specific water body that we have data for and looked at the percent of stations meeting the criteria. So for example, North Bay, 100% of the stations met the TN criteria, the nitrogen criteria. Only 75 met phosphorus criteria, 50% met chlorophyll, and 100 met the fecal coliform. So this lets you kind of dive in and look at maybe a water body you live nearby or you frequent more often than the whole St. Andrew Bay. One thing I just like to point out is that DEP considers Grand Lagoon as part of St. Andrew Bay, but we talk about it as Grand Lagoon separately. So we've pulled it out and you can see the stations are really not doing great that are in Grand Lagoon. So when you lump it to St. Andrew Bay, you just lose that area is having some problems essentially. And when the state evaluates, they're going to look at that nutrient region. So they're going to look at St. Andrew Bay, which includes Grand Lagoon, and determine if there's a problem or not. So realistically, the state wouldn't do anything to kind of potentially improve it.
And you said you were looking for the bacteria tracking?
Yeah.
We have funding.
DNA to figure out what the.
Yeah. Yep. So we can use something like this to target where we need to do those sorts of nutrient source tracking studies and the microbial source tracking studies. And then for St. Joe, we just did a simple does that station meet the criteria? Because there's no really like breaks of what St. Joe looks like as far as segments. And so for 2023, all of the fecal was met, all of the different nutrients met the criteria. And then the last thing that we have on there are salinity and water clarity. And we really just wanted to kind of provide this to show the variation that we have within our bay, particularly for St. Andrew Bay. So we've got salinities that are really fresh up in Deer Point, so lighter colored. And then the darker the color, the more saline it is. So out by the pass, it's going to be dark blue. It's nice and salty there. And then the size of the circle corresponds to the Secchi depth. So we had a great example earlier of how that worked. So the shorter you can see, the less clear, the deeper, the better as far as clarity goes. And then for St. Joe, it's a little different. Again, they don't do Secchi depth, so they just do turbidity. So the circles are kind of flipped here, where the larger the circle, the more cloudy the sample is, the more turbid it is. So the smaller circles are better, but if you look at what the turbidity units are, it's still overall fairly low. And you can see that the average salinity, the lowest value is 27 for St. Joe in 2023. So it's a much saltier system than all of St. Andrew Bay. All right, that's really the crux of what I had for breaking down the report card. And then I have a dashboard that I can kind of show you. It's very prelim, but I can drive it through here. And before I do that, I'll open it to questions and then maybe do quick announcements. Any questions? Mark?
These water body trends are actually any of them. When you say that this is the percentage of stations that met or did not meet the criteria, is that averaged over the entire year?
Yes.
So there could be stations that didn't meet it for a couple of months during that year.
Correct.
And that wouldn't change.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so we essentially took the average geometric mean for nitrogen for the stations, each of the stations, and then used that to determine if it met the criteria. So it doesn't take into account the like potentially monthly variable. It's an average. So yeah. Okay, maybe before the dashboard, I'll do the announcements. So we have a couple of things going on. So one of the things is a sea urchin survey. I don't know if anyone's been out to St. Joe Bay in the last couple of years, but there's been huge amounts of urchins out there, and they are hopeful that they've seem to have seen a decrease in the population there. However, we've gotten reports that there are a lot of urchins now over at Shell Island, in the Shell Island area, and we're trying to document if that's a recurring thing, if it would just happen to be a one-off. Because what happened in St. Joe is they eat seagrass, and so they cleared out a fair amount of seagrass in St. Joe Bay. And so we just want to try and be on top of it and know about it if we're seeing high numbers here in St. Andrew Bay. So if you do, report your sightings. It helps us just keep tabs on what might be going on.
What actions happen if there is too much?
So what was tried in St. Joe were sort of these relocation efforts where we'd kind of round up a bunch of them. And I'm talking like you jumped out of the boat and you were stepping on the urchins. It was like a carpet of urchins. So you'd collect as many as you can, and then FWC and DEP would relocate them to deeper water. And so maybe something like that would be done. That's really up to FWC and DEP. But just knowing so that we can kind of prepare for the potential consequences of it would be helpful.
Would be a benefit to the urchin collection system. If during the scallop season, they could ask the boaters to collect those, because boy, I'll tell you, you go to some of the scallop areas and there's 30,
just
40
covered.
boats in a little area.
Mhm.
I'm sure they can collect an awful lot of the urchins and with the intent of taking them out further and dropping them off.
Yes, they did try it they tried to do some things during scallop season, but it ended up becoming a bit of a safety issue for collection purposes and then in permitting and then ensuring that. So essentially, in order to participate, you would have to bring the urchins you collected to FWC and DEP and they would do the relocation.
Yeah, it was really a lot of people did want to participate that were gonna go out there, but they didn't want to have to come back and give the urchins to the FWC and DEP. It was just, some of the restrictions were a little limiting in the involvement.
Yeah.
But some folks would come out like after they were done scalloping and then come and collect for a little while and then go in, but yeah.
Yeah.
It was permit.
Yep, they really. Another thing we have is a volunteer network. So this is really kind of like an email list, a catch-all for any organizations that have volunteer events and they're looking for volunteers. You can post to it. And then if you're someone that's looking for volunteer opportunities, you can join this network, get emails when there are events going on. So if you haven't joined it, I highly recommend. We don't send out too many emails on it. Another thing, we are launching a vertical oyster garden program. So I should have brought one, but oh well. It's really just a string with oyster shell on it that you can deploy off your dock. Right now, we're really just doing it in St. Andrew Bay. That is where oysters are found. They're not really found in St. Joe Bay, so we're not trying to introduce them. But if you're interested, you have a property that is on the water, please submit an application so that we can figure out how many we need to make to deploy. And then if you've got kiddos, we have a teen outreach committee that will be joining or starting up pretty soon. Do we know when the next meeting? Okay. And this committee is through our estuary program and allows students from all of the high schools to come together to serve on one committee. So it's a great opportunity for students to meet kids from different schools and do some more estuarine related work. And they're really gung-ho. Last year was the first year of it, and we're excited to see what they come up with this year.
Now, this year is actually going to do an internship with our program for one of her like co-op periods of time. So it's been great to see these kids, and they show up on Saturday morning.
Yep.
Saturday afternoon.
That's when they want to meet.
That's their choice. That's what they wanted. So it's great.
Yeah. And then lastly, we are having our first annual 5K for the Bays on September 28th. Just got to make sure I say it right. And it'll be at Conservation Park. What better a place to have it than a park that was built to really help mitigate and fix some water quality issues. All proceeds will go towards the estuary program so that we can continue to fund things like this, our vertical oyster garden program. And we're really, really excited. So please spread the word. The sign up should be launched any day now. And that is all I have as far as announcements and that stuff. And I feel like I've just been standing up here talking to y'all, and it's almost 4 o'clock. But if you have questions and want to look at the dashboard, if you want to just come up here, that might be easier. And sure. Yeah. So it is, it's just going to be an interactive kind of website where you can zoom around and zoom to different stations and look at the trends of water quality for whatever parameter you're interested in over time. Whoa, okay. Apparently there is video and it is like all over the place in here. I don't know what they're seeing online.
Oh, they're seeing me.
Okay. I was like, what's happening? but it'll be a place where we continue to update with new data. We'll only put out these report cards annually, but as we get new data that's QA/QC'd, we'll load it to the dashboard. So that'll be like a living report card essentially. Yeah, and we're excited to have that. Yep, it'll live on our website. Yep. Yep, and the report cards are on our website. Well, the St. Joe one is kind of hot off the presses, so it's not on the website yet. But the St. Andrew Bay one is. So everything will link back to our website. Yes.
So what sort of coastal resources are you gonna be showing displaying this?
On the Tides and Talks. We are open to feedback and ideas. Yeah, we are. We really are. We've talked about a stormwater kind of panel, kind of organizing a bunch of the different community organizations to kind of have a panel and try to recruit more volunteers if they need them, talk about the different events and work going on. Those are some of the ideas we have, but we are all ears.
You guys have ideas, to hear
Mhm.
or people.
Yep.
Because we really want this to be something the community wants to come to, so.
I'd like to hear about seabirds.
Yes.
I'd like
Yes.
to hear more about the Healthy Beaches program, which you mentioned briefly. But, I think it's on good interest.
Yeah, we could see if we can get someone from Department of Health to come.
Could you comment on the oyster program, a little more extensively? How long has it been in place and what sort of seasonality is there to it in terms of getting involved with it, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the Oyster Garden program is, we really don't have, so I'll back all the way up. So FWC has been doing some work in St. Andrew Bay to kind of figure out what's going on with the oyster populations. And they previously identified that there's kind of a data gap here as far as what we know about oysters, where they live, where they survive, and what their like habitat suitability is in our bay specifically. And so one of the things that we're really interested in seeing through the VOG program, the Vertical Oyster Garden program, is recruitment of oysters on those. So right now, we really think of like North Bay and West Bay and East Bay, but we have as being really great areas for recruitment for oysters, but we have some out on the dock at FSU Panama City, and it is loaded with oyster spats, of baby oysters. And so hopefully our student intern Carly will have an interest in kind of taking on some monitoring of that, to look at seasonality, when we're seeing baby oysters pop up there, if they're growing, when they're dying, if they are dying. So it's really kind of trying to fill a lot of these gaps that FWC can only do so much. They're doing a lot of monitoring in West Bay, North Bay, and East Bay, but not really in some of the other areas, and it's so spread out. So there's kind of different levels of monitoring that we would ask people to do. It could be, I just want to put one out and maybe take a picture. It could be, I want to do some of the monitoring where I weigh it or try to count the number of oysters on it and maybe identify what else settles on it. Or, I'd be okay having an intern come out and do the monitoring for me. So we're kind of looking to fit the community's needs with what they would like as far as doing that, and kind of, again, up to you on the number that you want on your dock, for example. Really trying to make it work for what the volunteers who are letting us put them out would want. Yes.
Do you have problems with the oyster drills over here?
Not to our knowledge,
We didn't see very many
yeah.
when we were.
Yeah, we didn't see very many doing the living shoreline monitoring. I don't think we've seen them.
We haven't seen them yet, and
Okay.
we have some oysters that are growing with DARPA with a refence project that's DARPA funded. And they're under the pier at FSU, and we haven't seen them there. They are in bags, so they're suspended off, but we haven't, and I think FDAC said that that's not something that they
Yeah.
find here as well.
And they don't really monitor for it
Because it's
because they don't really see it. FWC will note it if they see it. I think maybe I've been out with them one or two times where they've been, wow, an oyster drill, and it's more of a surprise than a regular occurrence.
But there is an oyster sponge kind of looking?
There is another, that's another predator. Again, I don't think I don't think FWC has seen a lot of it. I don't know if it's up on Becca's reefs, then I haven't gone out monitoring with her on those.
And then the porcelain crabs,
Oh, yeah,
we've seen those
Mhm.
that are supposed to be really bad, at least in Alabama, they're very concerned about it. I don't know anything about them, so.
yeah.
And then just one thing to note with the vertical oyster gardens is as it grows, the intent is that we'll come back and collect it and put it onto restoration projects to help to, if you have an oyster that's alive that has chemical signals, that'll bring other oysters to it in theory. So that's what the intent ultimately will be, but we don't have any of those projects permitted and identified yet, because we don't even know if it's gonna work.
Yeah.
It's a test.
Yes. Any other questions, ideas?
Before y'all leave, if you can sign in, and then there's some extra copies if you didn't get one before. We do have all of this on our website, which is just our safjdep.org, the new website. We're very proud of it. But feel free to get in touch with us if you think of something later on. But thank you all so much for coming out. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Thank you for on the fly, jumping in to do it when we
Can I get a copy of your presentation?